Back in 2019, Yamaha single-handedly revived the mid-range adventure bike segment with the Tenere 700, and it's held its ground ever since, largely thanks to its unique, stripped-back character. But now, in 2025, with ride-by-wire traction control and riding modes for the first time, is it just one of many now, or perhaps better than ever? Let's find out together. Welcome to the presentation of the new Tenere 700. Welcome to the desert. Hi everyone from Morocco. I'm a little southwest of Marrakesh. Calling it a desert might be a bit of a stretch. We didn't exactly ride over towering sand dunes. It was more like rocky plains, desert scrub, and then we climbed into the mountains. Absolutely stunning scenery. This is actually my first time in Morocco, and I'm extra excited to be here, not just as a journalist, but as someone who owns a Tenere myself. I've got one from the first generation, and now I'm here at the launch of the brand new 2025 Tenere. We're looking at two models being launched, the standard Tenere 700 and the Tenere 700 Rally. They've actually slimmed down the Tenere lineup. If you remember, last year there was still the Explore and the Extreme versions alongside the standard one. Those two are now gone, and their features have been folded into the two remaining models. The Explore becomes a low-seat variant of the standard Tenere 700, which you can configure when ordering. And the Extreme, that's now essentially integrated into the Rally version, which already existed, but now comes with upgraded KYB suspension, high front mudguard, and so on. I'll explain what's special about the Rally in a moment, but enough with the intro, let's get into it. Before we dive fully into the riding impressions, here's a quick note from behind the scenes. As you'll hear me mention later, time was really tight during the on-camera presentation. So in this video, I'll be chiming in once or twice with some extra context. For example, I ended up with a flat front tire on one of the rougher parts of the test route. No big deal, the tire was changed in no time. But the pit crew, in the rush, forgot to plug the front wheel sensor back in. So from that moment on, the display showed 0 kilometers per hour. Since 2019, Yamaha has sold 70,000 Teneres, quite a figure. That gives it a proud 23% market share in the mid-size adventure segment. It's always stood out thanks to its character. But now, Yamaha has made some fairly major changes. Before we talk about the ride-by-wire system and everything that goes with it, let's start with the more peripheral updates, the geometry and exterior tweaks. At a glance, it still looks like a Tenere, but look closer and things have definitely changed. Take the front lights. The bike now comes with slightly squared-off LED headlights, rearranged for improved visibility at night. We only rode in daylight, so I can't say how much of a difference it makes, but that's the intention. Pretty much every panel on the bodywork has been revised too. The seat is now a single-piece design, still at 875 millimeters high, but it gives you more freedom to move around. At the front, the tank sits lower and further forward. The idea here is to tackle one of the classic criticisms of the Tenere, that slightly top-heavy feel, and give the rider more space to shift around in the saddle. We covered about 150 kilometers today, splitting time between both models, half a day on each. Without having my own bike here to compare back to back, it's tricky to pinpoint the changes precisely. A lot of the updates are subtle, and honestly, my personal Tenere has been sat in the garage for months during the off-season, so it's hard to say definitively, yes, this feels different. That whole front heavy behavior, and more or less than before, hard to say. That said, in some of the more technical sections where you need to move around on the bike a bit more, I did feel like it was slightly easier to bring the outer knee forward, maybe. What I can say for sure is this: the new wide foot pegs are fantastic. They're the same type as the ones you get on the World Raid model, a real improvement in terms of control and comfort. But here's my first bit of criticism. I noticed something a bit annoying. I don't think they changed the position of the side stand, but now when I'm standing up on the bike, my heel constantly knocks against this little extension of the side stand. Could be just me, I've got size 45 boots, but it did get on my nerves, especially when my heel dropped a bit and actually got caught on it. Not a deal breaker, but definitely not ideal. Away from the front of the bike, lots of other panels have been tweaked as well. Here's something that many Tenere owners will be happy about, especially those who like to modify their bikes. The tail fairing is no longer a single solid piece. If you've ever tried to remove the number plate bracket or install a luggage rack, you'll know how awkward it used to be. That's now a thing of the past. They've also reinforced the dashboard mounting and the luggage attachment points, more of those small but welcome improvements. One of my personal highlights, the integrated fuel filler cap. I've lost count of how many times I've left the cap from my 2019 model lying around during a fuel stop. Now it's all built in. Super neat. Massive win. Of all the little changes, the wide foot pegs stood out the most to me. They make it so much easier to control the bike with your feet. Possibly that also links to the tank being lower. It might not be a huge drop in center of gravity, but it does feel a touch more manageable. Still, at heart, the Ténéré remains a bike that carries a bit of weight over the front. Alright, I think I've kept you waiting long enough. Time to get in the saddle and talk about the most important new feature, the ride-by-wire. From here, I want to tackle the big question around the 2025 Tenere 700. Is it still brilliant? Now that it has ride-by-wire, and let's be blunt, that raw mechanical purity is technically gone. How does it actually feel? The engine itself hasn't changed. Sure, it now meets Euro 5+, but the ride-by-wire system wasn't something Yamaha just wanted to add for fun. They said it was the only realistic way to hit the stricter emissions targets. Electronically adjusting engine parameters is simply more effective, so that's why it's here. Otherwise, power output remains at 73.4 horsepower and torque at 68 Newton meters. So it's still that same gutsy tractor-like CP2 twin that I personally love, full of low-end pull and always ready to drive forward. The only difference now is that there's a layer of electronics between your wrist and the throttle bodies. How does it feel? Well, one of the clearest advantages shows up right here, where we're riding slowly. I'm in second gear, waving the guy behind me through so he doesn't get bored. And in this kind of low-speed situation, there used to be a big issue. With the old throttle cable, throttle response at low speed had harsh on-off transitions. You'd let off, then get back on the gas and the bike would jolt. That's now gone. The electronic throttle smooths it out beautifully. Massive plus. Once you're moving and giving it some throttle, the engine character feels very familiar. That's no surprise, the power figures haven't changed and the engine internals are pretty much untouched. They did shorten the intake tract slightly, which in theory gives a bit more punch at low revs, but without a direct comparison against the older model, I'd struggle to say I actually felt it. What I did notice, and I really had to focus on this, is that the throttle feels just a tiny bit less direct. Not sluggish, just ever so slightly softer in how it connects. A few of the other journalists mentioned they couldn't pop the front wheel up as easily with a flick of the wrist. But we all agreed, the difference is small, and that's in the sport mode. There are two riding modes, Explore and Sport. I haven't spent loads of time yet on the new Tenere, so I'm still getting a feel for it, but here's what I can tell you so far. Sport mode gives you a sharper throttle response, and it gets surprisingly close to the feel of a cable throttle. It's not quite one-to-one, but it's close. If you're a die-hard purist, you'll probably still feel that it's a touch less immediate, but for most riders, it'll feel just as intuitive and fun as ever. The engine's charm is still very much alive. We've talked about the ergonomics and we've talked about the throttle. Now let's move on to the next big topic, electronics. Because for the first time, the Tenere now has some proper electronic features on board. And that's a big change, especially for this bike's audience. We've already talked about the ride-by-wire, so what about the rest? First off, the switchgear has been completely redesigned. That infamous little dial that some previous versions had, not the original, but the ones that came after, it's finally gone, thank goodness. What we've got now is a proper modern 5-way controller. You press the mode button, a menu pops up at the bottom of the screen, and from there you can move left and right, long press down to deactivate something, quick press up to activate. Simple, clear, and finally in line with today's standards. You now get 3 ABS modes, fully on, rear off, and fully off. As for traction controls, it's either on or off, nothing in between. Yamaha said they deliberately wanted to avoid overloading the bike with too many features, so no multi-stage TC here. I think that's fair enough, and to be honest, the system works well, but the engine is so smooth and predictable that personally I turned it off after a quick test and never felt the need to switch it back on. The Tenere still feels best without it. Now, about those riding modes, Sport and Explore. These two are very different in how they deliver power. Explore is extremely soft, as it takes a fair bit of throttle twist before the bike starts to respond. Perfect if you want to ride chilled or relaxed, but, and this is important, If you're used to the older Tenere and you hop on this new one in Explore mode, you might think, wow, this ride-by-wire is rubbish, where's the punch? Because compared to the old cable throttle, Explore feels very tame and dulled down. Switch it to Sport though, and it's a whole different story. This mode brings the throttle response much closer to what we're used to from the older model. It's hard to say in a direct one-to-one comparison, but to me it feels like it gets pretty damn close. And for any off-road riding that's even slightly demanding, deep sand, technical climbs, or sections where you need to give a precise jab of throttle, Sport mode is absolutely the way to go. Explore just felt too sleepy for that kind of riding, too much throttle rotation for too little reaction. Overall, I think the electronics are well implemented, and Yamaha has added something really practical, what they call a quality of life upgrade. When you stop the bike and hit the kill switch, your settings stay as they were. ABS, traction control, riding mode, they all remain untouched. They only reset if you actually switch off the ignition as required by law. So now, for example, you can pull over, kill the engine for a moment, and then fire it back up without having to redo your setup every time. That's a small but hugely welcome change. One more thing I want to mention before we move on, and it's a small one but still worth pointing out, the new indicator switch. It's a bit unorthodox. Falls into that category of, did we really need to reinvent this? I'm not sure it adds any comfort or benefit. It also now has automatic cancelling, which I'm personally not a big fan of, but hey, let me know what you think. Personally, I'd have preferred a regular straightforward indicator button. Now, on the practical side, they've added a waterproof USB-C port right in the middle of the cockpit, super handy for travel and charging on the go. Also, something I haven't mentioned yet, in terms of electronics, you can now spec a quick shifter as an optional extra. Our test bikes didn't have one installed, so I can't comment on how well it works. The new cockpit also introduces two different display layouts. Street is the new one, more tailored to road use, with a traditional looking semi-analog ref counter style. Then there's Explore, which is the familiar layout from previous models, with the ref counter off to one side and key info in the center. I think both are well executed and easy to read. Now, since we're talking about an adventure bike, of course we need to talk about suspension. And here too, Yamaha has made changes. On the standard Ténéré 700, while the components are similar in essence to the previous version, this is the first time the suspension is fully adjustable, including preload. That's a big deal for off-road riding, where you often want to tweak preload to raise ground clearance or match extra luggage weight. The overall damping has also been slightly refined, especially at the rear. Here's an interesting technical change, the rear linkage. Previously the rods were straight, now they're banana-shaped, curved, which helps the rear shock act more progressively. It's meant to give a more controlled feel across the stroke. Is it a night and day difference? Probably not. But we rode on a fair bit of demanding terrain today, and I have to say, the suspension handled it all really well. We weren't just on nice wide gravel roads, there were sandy sections, stone steps, proper hits, and I felt confident pushing a bit harder thanks to how the bike soaked it all up. Where things start to separate clearly is when you compare it to the Rally. There's no question that the Rally uses higher end components. You can feel it in the way it handles smaller bumps. The initial sensitivity is better. That's partly down to the special low friction coating too. It's premium stuff. But, and this is important, if you're more of a chilled out, travel focused adventure rider, the standard version might actually be the better choice. In fact, quite a few of the other journalists, ones who aren't hardcore off-roaders, actually said they felt more comfortable on the standard Ténéré. So before you go picking one or the other, think about what kind of riding you actually do. Also think about seat height. The Rally, with its taller seat, only really lets you get both feet down if you're around 1.80 m or taller. If the terrain gets uneven, it becomes even trickier. The standard Ténéré is much more approachable in that sense. Now, in terms of outright performance, sure, the standard suspension can't quite match the Rallies. If you start to push hard, especially when riding fast through back-to-back bumps or jumps with the throttle open, you'll find the limits. It starts to get a bit unsettled. But for stock suspension on a relatively affordable adventure bike, it's seriously good. Travel-wise, we're talking 210 millimeters at the front, 200 at the rear. And honestly, I didn't feel like I was missing anything today. At the speeds we rode, I was perfectly happy on the standard version. Right then, time to talk properly about the Ténéré 700 Rally. We actually spent just as much time on this version as on the standard one, half a day each. And yes, there are some major differences. The most obvious one, the suspension. Just by looking at it, you can tell this bike means business. The high front mudguard and beefy KYB forks give it a proper rally raid vibe. It's a mix between the old rally edition, which had the retro styling, and the more recent extreme version, which was more about serious off-road performance. Essentially, what Yamaha's done is blend the look and feel of the rally with the hardware of the extreme. These KYB components are more or less the same as what you'd find on the World Raid. Top spec parts, fully adjustable, lighter than the stock setup on the standard bike, and featuring a Kashima coating for reduced friction. You get 20 extra millimeters of suspension travel at the front. That's 230 millimeters total. That's proper off-road spec with loads of reserve. And even with the pace we were riding at today, I never once managed to bottom it out. The rear shock is also fully adjustable, and there's an interesting detail underneath. This version still uses the old straight linkage design rather than the new banana-shaped one from the standard Tenere. Yamaha explained that the rally's rear shock has more stroke as more travel, and after testing various combinations, they found that the old linkage actually worked better with it. It provided the progressive spring rate they were after and kept the rear suspension working in harmony. On top of that, you've got a visible little rubber stopper down there, an extra bit of protection to prevent hard bottom outs if you're really sending it. Ergonomically, the Rally gets all the updates from the standard model, but then adds a few of its own. First up, the skid plate. It's made of 4 mm thick aluminium. Solid stuff. The foot pegs are different too, same basic shape as the standard ones, but made of titanium and with slightly sharper teeth for extra grip. There's no rubber insert on the Rally version, but here's a tip. If you're doing lots of motorway stretches and want more comfort, the rubber insert from the standard Tenere fits perfectly into the Rally's pegs. The seat is also a single-piece unit, but it's not identical to the standard one. It's 35 mm taller, giving you a seat height of 910 mm. It's got a grippier surface and raised rubber padding in certain areas to give you better hold when moving around. The idea here is maximum freedom of movement with plenty of traction when things get tricky. And it works. Even in the more technical bits we rode, I could lock in with my knees exactly when I needed to. Loads of room to shift your weight. It felt really good. Now, one last exclusive feature of the Rally, its special Rally display mode. Alongside the standard Street and Explore layouts, the Rally adds a third as a kind of roadbook style view. You can set up 2 separate trip counters to help navigate or track sections. A fun little feature. I didn't use it much, but it's there if you want it. Almost forgot, tires. Technically, both the standard and Rally versions come with the same stock tire, the Pirelli Scorpion Rally STR. But for this test, the Rally was fitted with Michelin Anarchy Wilds, not just to show off its capabilities better, but also for homologation. In Germany, for example, this tire is officially approved for use on the Rally model. It's a true 50-50 dual sport tire, perfect for riders who want to stay road legal while still getting proper off-road performance. So if you're based in Germany and want to stick with what Yamaha recommends, the Anarchy Wild is the tire to go for. We've now gone through all the changes and I've shared a bunch of first impressions, but let's circle back to what I think is one of the key reasons so many people have bought a Tenere over the years. And the big question, has that reason held up? I'm talking about what I'd call its toughness. The sense that this is a bike you can rely on, especially when you're far from home. Yamaha has a reputation for building solid machines. And the Tenere has been bought by a lot of riders specifically because of that, because they wanted something dependable for long distance or remote adventures. I honestly don't think many of them were asking for ride-by-wire or extra electronics. As I explained earlier, ride-by-wire wasn't something Yamaha added for fun. It was a response to new Euro 5+ regulations. They had to find a way to meet the new standards, and electronic throttle control made that possible. And to be fair, I think they've implemented it well. The bike still feels natural to ride. It hasn't lost its soul. But what about the rest? Have they listened to the community in other areas? I asked them, wouldn't now be a good time to have a bolt-on subframe? Their answer, no, because it would increase development costs significantly. And that would mean a higher retail price. That's a fair point. The Tenere isn't meant to cost as much as a full-fat touring enduro with all the bells and whistles. But here's something I don't quite agree with. If you're already adding ride-by-wire and electronic systems, why not go one step further and give it cruise control? That would be a big help on long motorway stints. Yamaha's reasoning, they didn't want to move away from the Tenere's purest roots. Fair enough, but I still think cruise control would have made sense, even as an optional extra. You wouldn't be forced to use it, but for those who want it, it would have been a welcome addition. That said, a lot of what has been updated does come from rider feedback. Wider foot pegs, smoother suspension response, less vibration in the cockpit. Those aren't gimmicks, those are real-world improvements based on how people actually use the bike. And they've gone even further. The gearbox has been reworked. Gears 1 through 3 now have 6 engagement dogs instead of 5, and the dog angles in gears 4 through 6 have been revised. These are small changes, sure, but they make a difference. Same with the clutch cable lever on the side of the engine. It's now rotated about 35 degrees forward. Before, it was easy to catch it with your trouser leg, usually at the worst possible moment. Not anymore. Little updates, but they all add up. So even if you're not particularly excited about electronics, there's still plenty to appreciate in the 2025 T7. And because I ran out of time in the live video to really dig into riding impressions, I want to come back to the question from the intro. Yes, some might argue that the Tenere has lost its defining feature, that raw mechanical simplicity. But to me, its magic was never just about something as basic as a throttle cable. It was about how it felt to ride. And there are still very few adventure bikes that feel this comfortable and at home on loose ground straight out of the box. That's true even with its quirks like the high center of gravity, which hasn't gone away. But the new electronics don't interfere with that core experience. Some of the updates are clear upgrades, better suspension, reduced front heaviness, smoother throttle transitions. Others, like the traction control or TFT layouts, might not matter to everyone, but they don't get in the way either. Honestly, the new Tenere doesn't have any serious flaws. The quirky indicator switch or lack of cruise control, those are minor complaints. And when you weigh them against the broader improvements in everyday usability and off-road performance, it's clear Yamaha has refined the T7 recipe even further. As for the rally, it takes that recipe and turns up the heat. It's packed with potential and it begs to be ridden hard. But because of its height and more aggressive suspension, it's really a bike for taller riders who want to blast down rocky trails, tackle single track and keep the pace up. If you're mostly riding gravel roads, forest tracks or mild off-road, I'd say the extra 1,200 euros for the rally would be better spent on high-quality off-road gear and tires. So is the Yamaha Tenere 700 just one of many in 2025? For me, not at all. In fact, in some ways it's better than ever. Whether it's worth upgrading, that really depends on your own priorities as a rider. So what do you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. That's it from me. My time during this stand-up session is up. It's been a packed day. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed it, give the video a thumbs up. Thanks for letting me be part of it, and I'm sure we'll see each other again soon. The season's off to a great start, and there's plenty more to come. See you out there, take care and ride safe.